Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the fifth webinar in the Clubhouse Development webinar series. Today, we're going to be discussing corporate sponsorship and foundation grant funding. Before I tell you a little bit about Cogio and our speaker, I want to remind you that if you have any questions throughout the webinar, you can use the GoToWebinar tool, and we will review those before we sign off. Now, I'll introduce you to who we are. Cogio is the leading expert in the sports nonprofit industry. Our management team has 70 years of fundraising experience and has raised over $750 million for more than 200 nonprofit organizations. One of the reasons that we're particularly passionate about working with sports and soccer clubs like yourselves is that our executive management has both played and coached the game. And that includes Rob Cusell, who is your speaker today. As a college All-American and highly successful soccer coach, Rob is now the Managing Director of Consulting Services at Cogio and has helped hundreds of sports organizations implement strong organizational development and fundraising strategies. And with that, I will pass it over to you, Rob.
Thanks, Mel. So if you go to slide number 3, you'll see that we're focusing today on corporate and sponsorship, foundation grant funding, and corporate giving as well. And it's the fifth webinar of 8. It's an important one. There's a lot of potential here. And we're going to look at some very specific examples as well later on in the webinar. The next slide, again, if you go back to the Clubhouse of Development, we're now up in the 2nd floor, and you can see where the corporations and foundations fit in. And it is, in a way, an extension of annual membership giving and events. Some of the people that give to those areas run businesses or sit on foundation boards. So oftentimes we see crossover. So what are we going to do today? Next slide, number 5. We're going to understand what foundation outreach and corporate engagement, what they are, and how they add to short-term success and long-term funding through organizational sustainability. So they're a big part of what happens, whether it's grant making or just corporate engagement, business engagement, either through giving or sponsorship or naming rights. It happens. The second reason, and I touched on that already, it's why activity in both areas, corporate and foundations, are fueled by the lower floors of the smart home Clubhouse of Development. And then we'll close out the webinar by talking about technology and how that impacts in terms of foundation and corporate engagement. So let's get going. So then slide number 6. So this is really helpful. Again, individuals in blue make up over 70% of total giving annually. And then second and third are foundations and corporations. Now, actually, bequests are even more than corporations. Bequests are wills. So corporation makes 5% of total giving, and foundations 16% and growing. So you can see it's important because overall it's 21% of total giving, about on average. So the next slide, number 7. So what types of foundations are there? And what types of corporations are there, and how do they really operate in terms of giving? So there are really 4 types of foundations. There's the private non-operating foundation, and their role is to give away money. They don't run programs. They're there to appraise proposals, make sure the proposals that they're going to fund meet their guidelines. And generally it's, if their corpus, which is their overall endowment, their overall reserve fund, they generally give away 5% of that every year. Those are the most common. The second are donor advised funds. Generally, they sit within private companies or within community foundations. And they're prevalent. It's a great way for wealthy people to make a difference, very individually. And so they're very interesting. And then you've got private operating foundations. They operate programs as well as awarding grants. So they generally are staffed up a little more and they're really focused on making sure that programs are running as well as they could. A good example of that would be the Andy Roddick Foundation in Austin, Texas, where he and his wife are, Brooklyn Decker, I think her name is, are really making a difference in terms of the underprivileged in Austin after school activities. And there are many other athletes that have private operating foundations who are making. Damian Tomlinson also comes to mind. We did a little bit of work with them. And then the final we all know about, which are community foundations. Every large city has a community foundation, and their goal, generally speaking, is to make an impact in the 501c3 in that community. And they generally operate like a private non-operating foundation. They don't have programs, generally speaking. That would be the exception, not the rule. And in Tennessee, you've got the Nashville Community Foundation, and then others in some of the, Chattanooga probably has one, and other larger cities within the state. And large towns as well. We see community foundations in any city over 50,000 should have a community foundation. So that's the foundation world. Corporations. Really, there are 5 types of corporations. The largest are the C Corps. They're well known to you. They are the Targets, the Dick's Sporting Goods, Amazon, etc. And generally, they have a department, one individual, maybe 2 or 3, whose sole function is to do community service and to give away grants. Banks have to do it by law because of the Community Reinvestment Act. They have to reinvest a certain percentage of their profits into the 501c3 sector. So they're always of interest. Any type of financial institution, whether it's any kind of financial institution, really. The most important, federal credit unions are in play. Everything that's bank, retail banking should be of interest. S Corps are sole proprietors, and they get no tax benefit if they give through their company, but if they give individually, obviously they get that benefit. LLC, which is a limited liability company or a partnership, LLP, they do have tax advantages. And the great thing with S Corps and LLC, LLPs, is you've got sole decision makers in 2 instances, in the LLC and the S Corp, and then maybe multiple decision makers with the partnership. So it's a lot easier to get a decision through in terms of making the ask. It's almost like asking an individual. It's exactly like asking an individual, except the tax consequences are a little different in both instances. And then a sole proprietor, that is probably the easiest one because they get all the tax benefit as well, and very similar structure to an LLC. So the next slide, where do they support? What type, in our experience, what have we seen in terms of what areas do foundations support, and businesses, what areas do they support? Well, here's what we know. Foundations support programs. They support capacity building, namely capital, so complexes, futsal courts. Some do both, and some give in kind, right? Whether it's services, programmatic services, or consulting services, or generally as a broker. Volunteermatch.org is a great example of an in-kind foundation that essentially matches up volunteers. They're based out of San Francisco. Corporates are a little broader in their support. They also support programs. They also do capacity building, namely through naming rights, whether it's fields or stadiums or complexes. They definitely give in kind, right, in terms of equipment. So Adidas is known for that, Nike as well. They're not big on giving money, but they'll give away their stuff so that kids get hooked on it. And that's their whole ploy there. It's really interesting to see new players coming on the block in that area as well. And then employee matching. Many of your parents will have the benefit of an employee match, which is to say they work for a large company, generally a C Corp, well, always a C Corp actually, because it has to be shareholder driven. And if they give to your club as a 501c3 or the foundation of your for-profit club, then their company would match that gift, generally 1-to-1, up to $5,000 is generally the norm. So it's a great way to double the money. And certainly with our clients, we identify any potential for employee matching, and we advertise it. And then they can also volunteer, right? Great way to bring them in as volunteers, whether it's for tournaments, the sort of Habitat for Humanity model, right? Making sure you've got all the right people helping out. So you go to a large C Corp in your city and you say, hey, we've got, this tournament coming up in 2 years or for the next 10 years. And, would your company want to send out volunteers to really help us out and get credit for it in terms of community service? And then they become donors, right? So it's a great way to engage C Corps in particular. And then you know about this, which are sponsorships, whether it's jersey sponsorship, warm-up suits, both, having multiple sponsors. We see everything here. And then, field sponsorships, anything can be sponsored in our world. So there's a lot of potential there. And we'll look at corporate decks later on, so you see how you present this to corporations with various clubs and see how they do it. So the next slide, number 9. Here's a good thing. Both processes follow the same track. So in terms of engaging foundations, it's pretty much the same process as engaging corporations. Very interesting. So the research has to be done locally, right? So you want to do local foundations as well as local businesses. You want to narrow down strategic by their focus area and affinity. Would this business be interested in what we're doing as a club? Well, it's an orthopedic surgeon. Sure, they're going to be interested. Or it's an insurance company and they want to grow their insurance, retail base. It's a cigarette company. Well, no, we're not interested in that. What about smokeless tobacco? No, we're not really interested in that either. Budweiser? No, not interested. So you got to make sure that it's strategically that it fits in, right? And then you essentially create a final list of qualified foundations. And again, with the foundations, just focus locally. And there's certain code words that we use in an algorithm that we've created, and it really just narrows it down nicely. And so we identify anybody who's relevant, and we understand how to apply and what the processes are, and you get in the game. And you do the same thing with businesses, which is align all of the local businesses with the club and what the benefits might be. And you'll see how we do that through these corporate decks in a bit. And obviously, high net worth individuals within the club are going to have connections into various businesses and potentially foundations. So that's another great way to engage membership, which is something like this, right? It's like, hey, we've identified the Sophie Smith Foundation, which focuses on youth development in our area. Do any of you have any connection there? And here you're talking to your board members, you're talking to anybody that you know is connected within your membership. And sure enough, somebody might know the board member so that they can then have a conversation on why they love being on the board of the club and how the foundation should really consider it, etc. And then you basically, once you've got your list defined, you prioritize. Foundations will help you prioritize because generally they've got an application protocol, right? You can apply by this date, and here's what we want. Businesses are more fluid. But the key is to, again, prioritize, figure out what the strategy is, the tactics within the strategy, and then just engage. And either they're going to say yay, maybe, or no. And you just react accordingly. And you never take it personally if it's a no, ever. It's not about you. It's about it's just not happening, which is okay. And by the way, this is a numbers game. It's kind of like tryouts, right? The more kids show up of quality, the higher the quality of the teams. It's the same thing here, right? The more engagement you do, the more results you get. So let's get a little more specific now about best practices in terms of outreach, because it's all about outreach, as I just mentioned. It's all about a numbers game. So slide number 10. I just talked about this, the first one, which is triangulation, which is going through one individual to get to another, right? That's what we just talked about. So if you want to get to C and you're A, and you know that B knows C, you go from A to B to C because you know B. And that's called triangulation. It's real simple, but it's an art. So know your audience, know their goals, and how they want to make things happen so that when you get to them through triangulation, you've got a real compelling case to make. Both foundations and businesses, they want to understand impact, right? If we give to you, what does that mean in terms of impact? If we make an investment, because they give more generally, not always, but generally. If we make an investment, what's going to happen? We're not just interested in the administrative ratio, which should never be more than 13%. But we want to make sure that you're transparent, that you've got good governance, leadership, and that the programs are effective in terms of their sustainability. So make sure that you start measuring your activity year to year so that you have these kind of data points to give to foundations. And every foundation has got a 990. And so those are great in terms, once you've identified the foundation, go to guidestar.org or Foundation Online. They've merged, by the way, and check out their 990 because it'll tell you everything you need to know, which is who they give to, how much they give to on average, what's the frequency, how many grants they make, the size of the grant, etc. Do they make repeat gifts to agencies over the years? So there's a lot of good data. Next slide. Those foundations that actually have programs generally have program officers. And that's a huge advantage, right? Because it's not just a board of directors that you're dealing with. You're not just submitting it to an administrator who's the sole employee because they don't have any programs, or they're not large enough to have program officers, right? So they're foundations that are only operating foundations, like the Irvine or the Hewlett or the Packard Foundation or the Ford Foundation. They don't operate programs, but they are so big in terms of the amount of funding they give away that they've got a huge staff number of. So when you're dealing with the Correct Foundation, for example, you're dealing with a live individual. When you're dealing with the Ford Foundation, it's the same thing. These are national foundations that are looking to have a national impact. There are a lot of them out there. So if in fact the foundation you're dealing with, and it's not uncommon, identify which program officer is relevant from the standpoint of how you're trying to create synergy, how you're trying to make sure that there's a potential between the foundation and your club. So once you figure out who she is, who that person is, make sure you've got a real good plan for reaching out, making that first call, or sending the first email. Try and make the first touch cold to warm, which is to say, you either find somebody who knows the foundation well, that can go in and say, hey, you're going to get a call, or you're going to get an email from so-and-so at such and such club, really great people. You definitely need to respond and hear what they have to say. And make sure, if you get a call with the program officer, make sure you leave a question unanswered. That's a tactic we used to use at Stanford University when I was there. Why? Because it gives you an opportunity to go back and say, oh, by the way, that question you had about so-and-so. And that way you're building the relationship, and it's getting more intimate, and it'll help over time. And then if you're actually awarded a grant, make sure the stewardship is strong. Some foundations will require site visits, which is great, but make sure you take that seriously and you schedule the right people who are into it. And because if they come in for a site visit, particularly if you're building a complex, we just did one with the city of Springfield, Missouri. We brought the city council in, and that led to a $5 to $10 million investment from city council. They came in several times because they're getting all this stimulus funding, which is happening around the country. So if you're building a complex in Tennessee, you need to look at stimulus funding within Park and Rec or the city or be sure to be in touch with Mel, because she can explain to you how we're working with clubs around the country doing that. And again, if you're awarded a grant, make sure you've got best practices around stewardship practices, which is thanking. And we impose quarterly touches on that. So if a foundation awards you $10,000 for whatever area, then you steward it at $2,500 every 3 months, and here's the impact it's had. And that's really good practice. All right, let's look at some case studies now and just some documents so that we get a little more real. So this was a really good case study for foundation outreach in terms of what happened. In this case, it was a high net worth wealth screening, which is what we do with all our clients. We screen their membership. This particular individual attended a cultivation event. And then during a cultivation event, if you heard the event webinar, if you listened to the event webinar last month, you know that these are intimate events. And generally what they do is that they stimulate a secondary meeting that are one-on-one meetings, which is exactly what happened here. And during that one-on-one meeting, it turned out that this individual, she and her family had a private foundation whose sole goal was to provide socioeconomic opportunity to the underserved in the San Francisco city. And this particular club was really focused on financial aid and making sure every kid who was good enough could play in the city and not, make sure that they had the opportunity. And you'll note they were founded in 2014. So right out of the gate, they were giving away $150,000 a year in financial aid. Basically 45 fully funded kids. And so that really interested her. And she asked for us to submit a proposal to her foundation. And she said, be aggressive, go for go for a big number. And so we did. We asked for $125,000 over per year for 5 years, so $625,000. And they came back and they gave the club $500,000 over 5 years. So that's a transformative gift, right? Because that's pretty much their entire financial aid budget. And they were able to reallocate some of that money into the coaching salaries, which really improved their club. I think they've won several serious championships and all the good things. And then the stewardship that we imposed for them at $25,000 a quarter was highly effective. They're in their 4th year of this cycle. Now, this is a case study on corporate matching programs, some stats. This is highly relevant. So 65% of Fortune 500 companies, the larger companies, like all the ones that you see on the freeway as you're driving around, or all those companies, whether it's McDonald's or you name it, they match. And then 84% of donors say that, hey, if it's marketed that, your gift can be matched. We're not a religious agency. Most companies frown on religion. It's really weird, but that's the way it is. Then they're most likely to actually give. So if you do an analysis of your membership and it turns out that a third of your membership work for companies that have matching gift programs, you've got a built-in piggy bank right there. Because people get motivated to get their gift matched. I see it firsthand. My wife works for Genworth Financial. It's a large company, and they match. And so that motivates us. We don't give a lot, but it still motivates us. So I believe that, absolutely. 18 million Americans, individuals in America work for companies with matching gift programs. So that's relevant. And then, again, just on psychology, the last quarter, lower right, a third of donors indicate they'd give a larger gift if, in fact, there's a match applied to their donation. And that's why we do these challenge grants where we say, hey, we've got a donor that is willing to challenge you and she'll match the give, all giving 2 to 1 up to $20,000. That's what those are. It's literally a marketing ploy because people tend to get more motivated. It's a gimmick, right? But that's what it is. Slide number 14. Corporate engagement. There's really just a difference between a sponsorship and they'll expect some stuff for that versus a straight up donation and you treat that like an individual donation. So just make sure that you're very clear with the business on what the nature of the relationship is. Are they a sponsoring donor? Are they an in-kind donor? Are they a money donor? It's pretty much the 3 areas. Qualified sponsorships and donations are charitable expenses, so they can be write-offs as long as they're not an S corp. So make sure that you've got limited resources. So limit your research time unless the opportunity is targeted. You know, for example, we know that healthcare companies for 501c3s in sports, highly relevant for sure. We found that finance, whether it's insurance, banking, because they want more clients. They're also relevant. And then retail, sporting retail, any kind of retail is also very relevant. So those would be the big three areas, whether it's automobile dealerships, any kind of retail, food for sure, hospitality for sure, particularly if you're running large tournaments, right? You should have a hospitality sponsor or two. You should have a healthy food sponsor or 5, right? Maybe even a gasoline, electric vehicle sponsor, gasoline sponsor, whatever, but just all the, essential retail stuff. But healthcare for sure. Also real estate. We've seen deals where clubs do make with real estate companies where, if in fact they sell their house through this real estate dealer, the dealer will donate up to X $100 for every sale or whatever the deal is. So we see that. I see that actually here in Richmond, Virginia with the Strikers. The Strikers have done a deal with some real estate company. They put up signs over at Striker Park. It's pretty funny. And again, businesses are run by people. So it is individual relationships. When you're dealing with the company CEO, it's just that. It's an individual. If you're dealing with somebody who's the community relations manager for Costco, well, it's an individual. And so you got to deal with them as an individual. And so it's all about relationship. And again, avoid cold submissions. Make sure that somehow, things are done without just being cold, because you don't want to go into a black hole. Now, there are exceptions. When you make an application to Target, it's going to be a black hole, and that's fine, because we've seen our clubs, most of our clubs have had success with Target. Very high rate of success. So make sure you're applying to Target at a minimum if you're 501c3, and Dick's and others like that. Again, 15. This is really important, right? They're really big on ROI. So the corporate decks that we're going to look at next, you'll see, are pretty heavy on audience exposure metrics and whatever materials and media you're leveraging, right? Because they're thinking about, okay, what's going to contribute to the bottom line? Sales. Well, how do you get more sales? More exposure, more visibility, more traction, more traffic, right? So focus on 4 areas: people on email lists, monthly web visitors, and the demographics. Well, screening becomes critical. And then foot traffic demographics, if applicable. So anytime we work with a client that has a large complex or even a smaller complex that hosts tournaments, we do an entire economic analysis and really focus, and you'll see in a second with a couple of these corporate decks, really focused on, in terms of the metrics of eyeballs and actually incremental revenue, taxable revenue through people coming in from out of the city and even out of county. And then the 4th is probably the most critical, because everybody has this now, and that's social media, audience engagement, and demographics, right? So when we work with, say, state governing bodies, for example, Cal North right now we're working with a lot, their metrics are incredible in all areas, right? So they've got over 250,000 members, and the relative wealth, because it's Northern California, is incredible. And so that means that they're highly attractive to a lot of huge, big corporate that want that kind of reach. So we're teeing up some pretty big conversations coming up, but it really varies, right? So with that kind of client, you can go after the really big fish, right? Generally speaking, though, for a local club, you want to really focus on the local car dealerships, on, where you'll make an impact in terms of their local sales, right? That's the most bang for your buck you'll get. Local hospital chains, etc. Okay, now we can look specifically. So the first one we're going to look at, and Mel, I'll guide you through page by page, or we'll just go through the pages. But anyway, Orlando City Soccer School used to be known as Orlando City Youth Soccer. They changed their name, Seminole Soccer Complex. The second page is really just the index, right? It's a pretty big deck. because they're in full renovation in anticipation of the World Cup in 2026. They want to renovate the entire complex, turf the entire thing, light the entire thing. I think I've mentioned this in past webinars. The third, basically the mission. The fourth, quick overview. Again, the fifth, what are the programs involved? That shows breadth. And then the vision for the future, which again is taking all these grass fields. Some of you have been there, I'm sure, and then turfing the whole thing and making it really, really cool. And then here are the 4 phases involved. And then I mentioned this in earlier. This is an important slide, number 8, which is economic impact, right? 32,000 plus non-local visitors, 4 tournaments per year, with an average that's host to 600 and some odd teams. Nearly 40,000 hotel stays, almost 100,000 non-local visitor days, $120 per day per person. And so what's the economic impact? Nearly $12 million per year. And then the annual tax revenue increase is not insignificant. It's 2.4 million. Again, all of it is incremental. And this was done for the Orlando Sports Commission, which, that's their role, which is to drive economic activity. And it got really good reviews. Then the next slide, we look at presence. The next slide, we present all the sponsorships, which you'll see there are many, many. So you can be a website sponsor, a goal banner. I mean, there are a ton. We're just going to rifle through these slides so you can see that you can really present this. And if any of you want to see this, just email Mel after the presentation. She can send you a copy of all this, but just rifle through these, Mel. You see. Now, slide number 14 is interesting because this is sponsoring a player for a year. It's a community package. Then the stadium sponsor. There are all sorts of opportunities within the stadium itself. On slide 15. Anyway, you get the sense. It's a solid deck. It's very thorough, but certainly it's representative. It's as thorough as we see actually out there. Okay, back to the presentation. Slide 17. This is Lake Country Soccer in Springfield, Missouri. Similar concept. And again, let's look at this quickly. We're not going to look at every slide. We're going to look. Let me guide you. We're going to look at slide number 10 first. Again, you can see similarities. In this case, we're looking at shirts at 2,000 per year, etc. The next slide is sponsoring a player, a little more modest there, given the geography, 1,500 a year. The next slide are packages. There's a bronze, a silver, and then the slide after that presents gold and platinum. And again, it's really representative of naming rights as well as anything social media. Again, if you want a copy of this, just email Mel. She's happy to do that. And then the following slide, 14, are the naming rights for the complex. They've got a north-south indoor and then a press box. So 100,000, 75,000, 50,000, and these are all 2-year commitments, minimum, renewable. So they've got, and the last slide, again, 16 available fields, 15,000 per, and then the concessions, 5 years, 5,000, 2-year minimum. So again, very similar to Orlando City in many, many ways. Okay, back to the presentation. Slide number 18. Oh, this one's interesting. This is San Francisco Youth Soccer. So this is a league. So think of almost like a state governing body, except it's for a city, right? So if you register for competitive or recreation package in San Francisco, whether it's the Vikings, the Glens, Elite Academy, United, whatever, you've got to register through the San Francisco Youth Soccer League. So their corporate deck is a little bit different in that it focuses a lot on their media, obviously their media and their capacity. Let's look at slide number 5 to start with. And you can see that their programs are a little different. So they actually have at-school programs. They've got player clinics, youth leadership, and referee support. So it's not a club. It's completely different. so they reach a lot. And if you can see by the numbers, their actual reach within a city on slide number 6, right? 6,000 players, 440 teams, 1,300 volunteers, and then on the right side, they've got even more data. And so that's powerful, right? If you're a city business or a retailer, this is what they'll allow you to reach if you sponsor with them. And on the next slide, you can see we've kept it really simple here. 1,000, 2,500, 5,000, and 20,000. And then again, you get to all the stuff. Much more simple, this one, than the last two. And board of directors, in case they're asking. So that one is more simple, but very effective. Let's skip number 19. Let's go right to FC Frederick on 20. This is a campaign in Maryland that we just launched. And it is going to basically, they bought 150 acres. They're building the first large complex in Western Maryland for a very large club, which is FC Frederick. You may be familiar with it. And so this is their, what we call an infogram. And again, we do this for all our clients, which is just figure out all the vital statistics that might be relevant in terms of, what kind of reach they have, as we just talked about. The next slide is interesting. This was a roller derby client that we have in Portland, Oregon. And they decided to opt out. We gave them a series of proposals in terms of how they should present themselves. And then they wanted the whole a la carte menu. So there's a core on the left side. You've got the core stuff for the sponsorship. And then for little amounts of money, you can add stuff on the right. And so it's basically a la carte. Proved to be highly effective because it wasn't too expensive, yet you got a lot of value. And they host live events, roller derby, right? Women crashing into each other around a rink. It's great. And, it's a lot of fun. So a lot of businesses, namely breweries and, retailers, really want to get behind that, which is what happened. So really lots of fun. Oh, yeah, the next slide, 22. This is the club for which my kids play, or used to play. He's shifting over to FC Richmond next year. And this is interesting. So the Strikers have a sponsorship, not unusual, pretty big sponsorship, healthcare, with Bon Secours Hospital chain, which is a large healthcare chain in Central Virginia. And so if you look at the left slide, right, you've got your classic Nike kit, your travel kit for the Strikers, right? Or, if you've seen them at tournaments, orange and black. And then with this kit that we got in August came a pair of pink socks. Huh? Pink? What's that? Never wear pink. Well, it turned out they augmented their deal with Bon Secours, and they decided to celebrate October, which is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And so every kid on travel got a pair, and Bon Secours paid for the socks, all the incremental costs associated with getting Nike to produce these. And all the travel kids, boys and girls, home and away, have to wear their pink socks. And you can see in the middle picture, that was an intra-squad league game of boys in October of 2019, before COVID. And I took that picture, actually. And so it actually occurs. It's really cool. And so it increases awareness. It's very weird because, the pink is completely out of place in terms of the rest of the look. And it's effective. They've gotten a lot of good feedback on it, both at home and away. All right, let's close out with, leveraging technology. Well, there's nothing new here, right? It's in terms of reporting, it's QuickBooks. In terms of donor relationship and management, what we know works best is Salesforce, and we put all of our clients on Salesforce, and that links up to the Well Screening, Windfall data systems, and it also links up to QuickBooks. So all of it is integrated. And then obviously in terms of managing data, Google Sheets. We work on Google Sheets with all of our clients and our partners. And it's an easy way to safely store and manage data in a cloud. And yeah, Microsoft's still competing, but we really believe in you know, the effectiveness in that product and the integrity of that company, as you know, has been borne out, you know, versus Facebook in terms of data management and data integrity. It's complete opposite of Facebook. Okay, last slide before we close out, Mel. You know, what are the key takeaways? Well, I think you figured it out, right? It's all about relationship management, and it's also, you know, it's about getting serious and getting in the game and committing to it, because this is real money that they have to give away every year, right? The banks have to give away this money. Foundations have to give away the money, and they're growing. You know, as the stock market goes up, you know, one of the things we know is that all of these foundations are benefiting because, you know, they're linked in, not entirely, because they learned their lesson in 2000 and 2008, but they're still heavily invested. So every time the NASDAQ goes up 1%, and, you know, the foundation's corpus is $1 million, well, you know, they've just made a lot of money, $10,000 to the corpus, boom, in one day. Right? That means $500 more every year is going out to the community at 5%. So it's powerful, right? So that's really important. So get the relationships, understand who's the key players in businesses, who are the key players in foundations, who runs a community foundation, who's on the board, you know, et cetera. Anyway, I think you get the idea. So a pleasure. Hope this was helpful. And Mel, I'll let you close it out. Thank you.
Thanks, Rob. Hey, we do have one good question. The question is, how do we determine the dollar amount for the naming rights?
Yeah, you need to talk to us, but because it's literally all over the place. For something even like uniforms, we find that certain regions can expect more than other regions. And I can't make any assumptions because I have no idea where you are. I don't know, you know, if you're in Nashville, I don't know if you're out of the country, or so it's really, you know, and we're happy to talk to you without, you know, any cost. We don't need to contract to have that conversation. Yeah, we can definitely help you there, but we would just ask you a number of questions, and that would help us give you. What we can't do is give you some kind of ad hoc answer without having data points. So sorry, but I'm happy to speak with you. Just work with Mel, and like I said, it would take about 20 minutes at the most of your time, or just email us. But we would do it by email. We'd ask the same questions. So that's
Great.
it, Mel. That's the answer. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. No problem. The best way to get a hold of us too, and you'll be able to find the recorded version of this webinar and the webinars that have been part of the series, is going to be on the Tennessee Soccer platform that you can find on Cogio's website. And we will have an email sent out to you within the next 24 hours linking to that platform and to the webinar. So you can rewatch this and other webinars in the series and gain access to resources and easily chat with us, and we can set up meetings for you if you need. All right, thanks everybody for joining today, and thanks Rob for speaking. Appreciate your time.